Hey nerds. So, gonna talk about James Lindsay criticizing Aleksandr Dugin, which I think is interesting because, of course, James Lindsay is one of my favorite people to criticize. Former pseudo-intellectual crackpot and full MAGA, and he a former mathematician, of course, too, and he pretends to be a philosopher even though he just strawmans what they say or presents a quote from them and ignores the paragraph after it or deliberately interprets it in the complete opposite way that it's meant to be interpreted. So he's spreading all this like fucking propaganda about the how this idea that everything is Marxism and communism, Marxism, wokeism, socialism, feminism, postmodernism, critical theory, critical race theory, all of these things are just one giant monolith of a boogeyman. But I think it's interesting because he's like a full MAGA guy, whether he admits it or not now, that he's been criticizing what he calls the woke right lately, which I think is kind of dumb because as anti-war people who have been labeled as the woke right, like Dave Smith say, it's kind of like the people who are calling them the woke right that are actually woke because they're like all pro-Israel and wanting to be people to be canceled over having Israel views, although like the problem is that some of them are literally overt Nazis like Nick Fuentes. Anyway, that's a good way to mention that. Anyway, I think it's interesting that and good that even conservatives like James Lindsay can condemn literal fascists like Aleksandr Dugin. I'm going to start off with this comment because whoever you are, you're completely wrong. He's saying Dugin is overtly anti-fascist. No, he's definitely not. You should actually read his books. He's basically a fucking self-proclaimed fascist. He's not at all anti-fascist. He's written favorably about, he's like quoted Nazis and commended them and written favorably about them. He's said good things about Nazis who have committed war crimes. The ideology that he's advocating for is basically kind of like a new version of Russian Nazism, or at the very least fascism. And it's this idea that Europe should have this like Russian theocratic monarchy should spread, if not throughout Europe throughout the entire world, like basically another different version of Nazism. And he he's the problem is that he changes his rhetoric according to what audience he is addressing. So I was interested in him at first because I thought he sounded like a postmodern conservative, basically, because I like so-called postmodernism, which of course is actually post-structuralism, because contrary to what dumbasses like Jordan Peterson say, postmodernism is not the same as post-structuralism, and Foucault and Derrida are often at odds with each other. Like they use so-called post-structure deconstruction and they have different opinions on God in terms of deconstruction. Like Foucault is more of an atheist. He basically deconstructs God and religion, particularly Christianity. And Derrida basically he doesn't define it this way, but he basically essentially sees the idea of God as indeconstructible, basically the only thing that cannot be deconstructed. But anyway, so like I was saying, Dugin, he sounds like a sort of postmodern conservative sometimes, but he sounds like an outright fascist when he's addressing other audiences, and especially in his books. Like, for example, I've gone through his book, the Great Awakening versus the Great Reset, and it's this whole like fucking wacko conspiracy theory that Klaus Schwab and billionaires and world leaders at the Economic Forum are going to engineer a global Chinese social credit style system in which all the billionaires and world leaders own everything and everyone else owns nothing, and like you're censored based on what you say on social media, all this kind of bullshit that has completely no basis at all whatsoever. So anyway, we're going to get into James Lindsay criticizing Aleksandr Dugin here and laying out his explanation. And I think it's a good one because, like I said, it's a conservative laying out his opinions. And oh yeah, like if you read Great Awakening versus Great Reset, for example, he's literally talking about like how Biden is going to like destroy the world or destroy Western civilization, and MAGA is the only thing that's going to save the world and all that kind of shit. So we'll get into James Lindsay commenting on Aleksandr Dugin's ideology here and his connection to what he calls the woke right.
Short essay from 1997 by Aleksandr Dugin. I've been trying to avoid talking about Dugin, except to maybe mention him here and there. I don't think he should be taken nearly as seriously as he is, but he is taken very seriously, as it turns out, by people on what I'm calling the woke right. You can call him the dissident right, you can call him the new right, you can call him the post-liberal right, you can call him whatever you want, I don't care. But I've called him the woke right. And it's kind of funny. Dugin is a weird character. He is sometimes called Putin's brain. I think that that's likely not to be true. He is a Russian philosopher, if we use the word rather generously.
Yeah, it's kind of like more of a like really literally right-wing fascist political wannabe philosopher. And yeah, like people like the authors Michael Millerman, for example, have written a lot of books in which he explains Dugin's ideology, but he kind of like amps up this idea that Dugin is Putin's brain to make Putin have this like facade of intellectualism around him, basically, and him being like connected to Putin's ideology is kind of like exaggerated, mostly because Putin is not anywhere near that smart. Aleksandr Dugin is a fucking evil person, but he's also smart.
There are strong reasons to believe that he was or still is a Satanist. He's a very peculiar character. He's a weirdo. He's like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of dork. So it's difficult to imagine Vladimir Putin taking this man seriously, except in the sense that Putin can use this guy's philosophy to justify the stuff that Putin wants to do anyway. So I would not assume that we should ignore.
We're on a mission to give 2 million people all around the world clean water. This village in Malawi now has
completely what Dugin is saying, or the claim that he's so-called Putin's brain. I would guess that to the degree that that's even true, which I don't think is very high, honestly, that he is that Putin is using Dugin's ideas to justify stuff he wants to do, regardless of the rest of Dugin's ideas or character or personality. But my strongest suspicion with this guy is that he's basically a psyops. He's an export from Russia to America. And so tying him to Putin with this whole kind of, frisson on the far right.
Okay, again, James Lindsay does believe in this whole fucking wacko Great Reset conspiracy theory, so I'm skeptical whenever anyone calls anything a psyop. But the point that James Lindsay's making about Dugin still remains correct, that he's has this fucked up ideology.
After the Ukraine conflict,
he's making Trump look good deliberately and making Putin look good, and like he's a good guy who's allied with the US, right?
Or Ukraine war, that Putin somehow like the good guy for the American right. What's the logic of that, by the way? Okay, so the Ukraine war sucks. We can all say that one way or the other. What happened was Putin attacked Ukraine. The Democrats then dumped God knows how much money and effort and propaganda and BS behind Zelensky and so on into the Ukraine conflict. And so it becomes this Republican versus Democrat kind of polarized issue. I don't care, for the purposes of what we're talking about now, what the deal in Ukraine is or with Russia. I'm not taking a side on the war for the present commentary. I don't even have to get into it. I'm just saying that what happened in America is that the Democrats strongly backed Ukraine, and therefore the far right Republicans decided that they were anti-Ukraine, kind of in like one lump for kind of silly reasons. And so my guess is that this caused this kind of frisson of cool on the radical or far right in the US that was looking up to Putin as this like great leader who's the anti-democrat character. And he's doing all this, we're getting all this Russian propaganda, I should say, about all this stuff he's doing about revitalizing Christianity, which is probably fake for the most part. There's been all these great Russian propaganda videos. I'm not going to get into it about how like they have natural gas.
Revitalizing, it's not fake that he's trying to revitalize Christianity. If you read his books, when he's laying out his ideology, he talks about wanting to bring back this like specifically Russian theocratic monarchy, basically.
It's like poking at all the Democrat policies, Christianity, real and beautiful women, and so on. It's propaganda. But at any rate, the idea that this Aleksandr Dugin guy is Putin's brain then passes along this pathway. This is all I'm trying to say with all this nonsense. Dugin gets laundered into the American right, so we'll call him intelligentsia, post-liberal thinker orbit through this kind of
Yeah, people like Tucker Carlson have him on his podcast and paint him as this brilliant intellectual, so he can like launder so-called woke right opinions, by which James Lindsay means like fascist right-wing opinions.
Democrat left versus right dialectic happening here in the US. And so Dugin is taken more seriously by characters on the woke right, including, say, R.N. McIntyre. That's in scare quotes. R.N. McIntyre is not his real name. At the Blaze Media, which I
McIntyre is like literally sympathetic to Nazis.
Call him the Blaze Media propagandist, and others. And it's quite clear that, the laundering of Dugin's ideas is prominent there. When R.N. McIntyre recently appeared on Tucker Carlson's podcast, a few pretty astute observers that I saw on X gave pretty detailed accounts for why what R.N. was doing was merely regurgitating or repackaging Aleksandr Dugin's so-called fourth political theory for an American audience and delivering it through the medium of Tucker Carlson's podcast. And I think
the fourth political theory is Dugin's like main political theory. It's nothing unique really. He's about to get into it.
That's a actually strong and good read. So that's one of the first things about Aleksandr Dugin you have to think about, is that he had this concept called the fourth political theory that makes you wonder, well, what are the other three? They are liberalism, fascism, and communism. And his view is that it's time for a fourth one. And this podcast is going to be kind of about that, but we're not going to talk specifically about the fourth political theory, which is one of it's Dugin's most famous work. Instead, this tweet came out, post on X came out yesterday as of this recording, which is on Labor Day. So it came out at the last of August. And Aleksandr Dugin says, R.N. McIntyre, somehow I forgot the scare quotes around R.N.'s fake name. R.N. McIntyre is someone really deep and important. He is responsible and serious. I wish MAGA are like him. That is a hope. Okay, so he gets the full and unvarnished
So he wants MAGA to be more like Nazi sympathizers.
endorsement. R.N. McIntyre gets the full and
That's the reason people like Aleksandr. Well, actually, that's the reason like Nick Fuentes, the like literally Nazi podcaster, don't like Trump anymore, because they think he's not right wing enough.
unvarnished endorsement of Aleksandr Dugin. So it seems reasonable that maybe we do have to talk about Dugin's philosophy. Now, Dugin's kind of a dialectical thinker, but not in the straight kind of Hegelian way. There's elements of that. But this is what the idea of fourth political theory is that through the 20th century, or if you want to expand it to the middle of the 19th to the kind of end of the 20th, we have had a long run of something we could call the modern era. The modern era is maybe coming to, or has come to, a close and into a postmodern era. That's its own question. But during the modern era, there were these three political systems.
I think it's more interesting. I think it might be Ulrich Beck, who is the postmodern sociologist whose book I've been going through, I think. But in one of his essays, he uses this term liquid modernity, which I think is more accurate, because it's not like modernity, but his idea is that we're not quite in the modern era, but we're not quite yet in the postmodern era either. So we're kind of in a transitionary period between the two. That's why he calls it a liquid modern era. So this idea that we're, kind of gradually shifting into more of a postmodern era.
Before that, we had tribalism, we had, absolute monarchy and this kind of stuff. Well, in the modern era, we didn't do that. We had these three systems: liberalism, communism, and fascism. And now that we're moving into a new general era, we need a fourth political theory that takes elements of each of those and moves it forward into this, whether it's postmodern or whatever world we live in now that has left the modern era behind. That's his thought. And so it's going to allegedly combine some of the aspects of
most folks do it wrong. Here's the right way to fix neck pain. Let me quickly explain.
Can I skip this one? Yeah.
Fascism and liberalism into a new system. Now, this is not identical to, but is similar to the regime that Patrick Deneen, a woke right post-liberal thinker from Notre Dame, puts forth in his book called Regime Change from 2023, which our current sitting vice president has endorsed rather strongly and agreed with. And Patrick Deneen says that his idea of he doesn't want to have like a military coup or something to overthrow the sitting government. What he wants is far more radical than that. That's actually a quote he gave regarding this book that he had written. And the idea that he wants actually is to have a complete change of political regime, not a change of personage, but constitutional order in the U.S. He wants to
have like basically this kind of anarcho-capitalist or literally monarchist king. Like he wants Trump to be King Trump in the same way, in the same way that he wants Putin to be like King Putin and have this like worldwide Russian monarchy, basically, like I was saying.
Replace the current constitution that we have with what's called a mixed constitution that mixes a kind of ecclesial monarchy. So like a church king, like a religious king.
Theocratic monarchy, like I said.
King. And then that mixes with an aristocracy that basically kind of runs things, that has noblesse oblige. You'll notice that the woke right talk about this idea a lot.
Just like the Curtis Yarvin thing, right? It's a theocratic monarchy run by an aristocracy, almost the exact same thing.
That you have to have these virtuous leaders. This is all coming from Deneen, who have a sense of what their nobility means and why they, rule, and it's to take care of the people beneath them. You'll hear them say a lot that the current regime or the liberal regime doesn't care about its citizens. P.S. It's not supposed to. The state caring about citizens is not the greatest thing.
Dugin also mentions in one of his books that, one of the reasons that he thinks there needs to be a fourth political theory is that he acknowledges that communism and fascism are bad, even though he's sympathetic to Nazis all over the place in his writing. But he also thinks that liberalism is insufficient, but he thinks that basically like liberalism is just as bad, if not even worse than one of them, because it's too much of a middle ground. And, part of his whole wacko conspiracy theory is that these world leaders and billionaires are all apparently Marxists, but this idea of neoliberalism specifically that he critiques, he says is going to be like genocidal. So he thinks it's going to be just as genocidal as fascism and communism, which is why he thinks there's a need for his so-called fourth political theory.
Yeah. But it's supposed to have this, like I said, absolute monarchy that's kind of this religiously backed, and that's going to give you the virtues in the unbound executive. Then it's going to be combined with a virtuous aristocracy. I'm sure they have a means for choosing who those virtuous aristocrats will be. I'm sure it's themselves and people who agree with their philosophy. And then it will have a limited amount of what we consider to be liberal or representative democracy. In other words, a little bit of republic mixed in. You'll hear this with RN all the time. When you talk to Tucker Carlson,
so he's kind of trying to blend all of what he sees as the best aspects of these three different political ideologies, but it's obviously the most right-wing authoritarian aspects of all three of them, making this like giant fucking authoritarian monster.
A lot of time, for example, talking about how the republic has already fallen, that we don't have a republic anymore. He usually harkens back to Machiavelli to talk about what the republic actually is and what it should be. So then he makes arguments like the fact that we have a standing army means that the republic is already gone. The fact that we're not following the Constitution means that the republic
a standing army means the republic is already gone. No, I think having a standing army is a pretty regular thing for countries across the world, and it doesn't mean that it's the end of the republic if that country happens to be a republic. Like technically the US is still a republic and it has a standing army, but that doesn't mean the republic is over. That makes no sense.
Already gone. and on and on and on. So if the republic is already gone, we need to live in reality. Therefore, we need to embrace the fact that the Constitution is dead. Therefore, we need to move on to something new. And what he would endorse is something akin to Patrick Deneen's regime change, or akin to Aleksandr Dugin's fourth political.
See, he wants regime change of the American Republic and the Russian Republic in order to like through this revolution make a theocratic monarchy
theory as
run by aristocrats
have spotted. And of course, now I've quoted to you where Aleksandr Dugin has endorsed R.N. McIntyre explicitly. R.N. McIntyre is someone really deep and important. No, he's not. He looks like a homeless person.
So
does Dugin. He is responsible and serious. No, he's not. Almost everything he says is a lie. I don't even think he's capable of saying a single true thing.
In this case, I wanted to mention this video because, like, as I mentioned, I criticize James Lindsay all the time, but I completely agree with everything he just said there about Dugin and McIntyre. He's totally, like, sometimes conservatives are the best at criticizing other conservatives, even though some of them can get crazy and only criticize the left, and, you know, vice versa with lefties, of course, too. But in spite of that, like, you know, some progressives are some of the best at criticizing extreme, unhinged woke lefties, too.
Like, all the way from the beginning of a sentence to the end of a sentence. I'm not sure he can get one that's out that's completely true. I wish MAGA are like him. I don't. That is a hope. So that's his endorsement. So let's hear a couple more tweets from Aleksandr Dugin, and then we're going to read an essay from 1997 that Dugin wrote called "Fascism, Borderless, and Red."
I think we'll just stop with his preamble here before we get into the essay, and maybe do that another time because this is fairly long already, and he has a super long preamble before he gets into it, obviously.
Describes his political philosophy. So here's one. This is from the 3rd of February this year. Vibe shift to the right is evident. We're reading Dugin on X. It is omnipresent. We observe it everywhere. If that is not conservative revolution, what is it? The country's return to nationalism, closed borders, tariffs, and sovereignties at high speed. Elon Musk deleting USAID shows what right woke means. So he uses the term woke right, as do I, but he calls it right woke instead of left woke. And he's endorsing right woke, right? MAGA
but he uses the term right woke like as a synonym for James Lindsay's woke right. However, he means it in kind of the opposite way, because Dugin obviously doesn't see himself as woke right. I mean, Dugin might see James Lindsay as woke right. They probably see each other as woke right because they define it in opposite ways.
It's very unforgiving. He quotes Donald Trump on 10th of February, and it should be like that. If we don't destroy them on next turn, they will certainly destroy us. So don't let this, quote, next turn happen. Right woke is this. Cancel those who cancel us. Okay, so you have this idea here.
That is woke right-wing cancel culture right there.
Of the woke right, he says on the 5th of January, so before all of this, and in fact, the day before Donald Trump, his election is certified. Remember, that happens on infamously January 6th. So on 5 January this year, Aleksandr Dugin put on X, now it is time for American right woke to make regime change. American business as usual in Europe.
That's nice.
The goal is to remake now.
So he wants regime change in America and Russia to have a theocratic monarchy run by aristocrats.
American left woke has made. Now notice that what you're seeing all around the woke right today now are calls for the CIA to do, under Trump, to do a color revolution in the UK and in the European countries to chase this stuff out. 11th of March. Being under attack, Elon Musk
authoritarian anti-wokeness. That sounds nice.
Has forgotten a bit to overthrow globalists, Starmer and Macron, and to continue making Europe great again. It is a pity. Soros acted stubbornly and constantly. Right woke should...
George Soros is like this billionaire villain to right-wingers in particular, even though he's put nowhere near the amount of money into any politician ever that Elon has put into Trump, of course.
pause.
And so what's involved in this
here's
process?
another
Well, it's pretty simple. They
stupid
poop.
ad. You're gonna be able to skip it. There we go.
So even before this, we need the access to AI core. There is a left woke AI. There is a neutral AI, Grok. There should be a right woke AI.
Yeah, it's not good, man. Imagine what the world's going to be like if there are all these extremely politicized, like political extremist AIs. It's not going to be fucking good, man.
1st of January, the first day of 2025, Overton window, which he's Russian, Overton window, is moving very swiftly. Woke is almost forgotten in less than a month. It looks like Stone Age agenda. LGBT, transhumanism, feminism, Neanderthal concepts. Maybe he should talk to Peter Thiel about that. Right woke is...
He has like borderline the same conspiracy theory as James Lindsay, except he also extends it to this transhumanism that Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin talk about, and that this idea that especially the rich elites all want to like transcend human bodies and merge with AI so that they can live forever. This like wacko ideology.
Already ruling. Remember, Peter Thiel just recently gave that infamous interview with Ross Douthat at the New York Times, where he said that what makes transgender so weird is that it's so primitive and barbaric. You're just trying to change your genitals. You're not trying to change your, say, entire body or your mind or your soul, and gives a full-throated defense of transhumanism.
And when asked if he thinks that humanity should survive, he hesitates for like 30 seconds and went, yeah, I guess. Maybe. I don't know.
On the 24th
or
of
yeah,
March.
Actually, it kind of sounds like, I guess I don't know. Yes, probably, but maybe. I don't know. I don't know whether humans should survive. Should humanity survive?
We have Laura Loomer quote tweeting President Trump, or tweeting a video of President Trump doing one of his like hardline things. Aleksandr Dugin quote tweets it and says, "Right woke begins." And it goes on and on. So this guy's
I don't understand why Aleksandr Dugin would have a problem with Laura Loomer. She's seems like just as wacko as him. If you understand their ideological political differences, explain to me in the comments, please.
And on this woke right idea, but he thinks it's a good thing and that it should be calling for regime change.
Oh, that's why. Never mind. They are similar, and he likes her woke rightness. Oh, okay.
It should have a regime change, not just in Europe, but also through maybe CIA interference, but also here in the US. And it is time for that. So back in 1997, remember that the Soviet Union collapses in 1992. They had this kind of pretend short period of time before Putin got kind of full power, where they pretended that they were going to have something like a Western style democracy. Then obviously we've established this kind of Russian national capitalist oligarchy run by the Putin regime. And this is going to give us some color for why I don't think that Dugin really is Putin's brain. But he writes this essay in that condition. And he starts off, it's a very short essay. It's only 3 pages. This is one of the reasons I didn't do it for a podcast before. So this won't take super long to get through now that we've had this introduction. He starts off
this
by
video is an hour long.
Saying there are...
Okay, I'll stop here when he actually starts getting into the essay finally, because this video is fairly long already. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you want me to do a separate one on him getting into specifically Dugin's essay, or I could do a separate video in which I just go over that essay myself. And yeah, I always forget to mention at the end of these videos, click my Amazon link in the description. If you buy anything through my Amazon link, then I can get a little kickback and no extra cost to you. And check out my Patreon page if you do want to give me money. Even like $1 a month is good. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Dugin, like James Lindsay, is a fucking wacko, but at least he's criticizing Aleksandr Dugin for being like a literal fucking fascist Nazi sympathizer at the very least, if not an outright Nazi. But yeah, anyway, James Lindsay's a wacko as usual, but it's good that he is for a change criticizing someone who is even more of a fucking wacko than him.